In the first video of this series, we heard Jesus' benediction, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called God's children." And we began to wonder what he meant by that. The label children of God in the Bible often applies to the angels, not human beings. So in what sense are peacemakers like the angels? And even more to the point, peace itself is not a simple concept, and impostors abound, from conflict avoidance to outright crushing of any dissent. What is the peace we should make, and how should we make it? That's the question. As we will talk about in the third lesson, Jesus himself provides a model for that life. But for now, we should also consider the reflections on which he drew, because as a reader of what we call the Old Testament, and he called Moses and the prophets, Jesus had some specific ideas about what peace would look like. We began with the book of Isaiah, which explored the social or even multinational dimensions of peace. Now let's turn to the Psalms, which pick up those themes and add further layers to them. The word shalom, which we translate peace or well-being, appears 20 times in Psalms. Let's begin with one of the most evocative occurrences in Psalm 85. The psalm offers a complex series of emotions. It opens with the statement of God's actions, "O Lord, you have favored your land, you have returned the exile," or maybe translated, "reversed the fortune of Jacob." The line speaks of an already realized act of divine salvation, the return to the homeland of those deported from the land by foreign powers, the Assyrians or Babylonians. It goes on in this vein until suddenly, in verse 4, we read the surprising request, "Return us, O God of our salvation, and stop being annoyed with us." In other words, the exile is not yet over. The psalm has shown us in a few words and by a simple contrast the tension that Israel feels between already and not yet. Not all problems have been solved. There's no way to go back to a past, which wasn't that good anyway, and yet the future has not yet dawned. Then the psalm leads us from tension to question when it says in verse 6, "Will you always be angry with us? And will you not make us live again so we can rejoice in you?" As we pray the psalm, we hope that divine punishment, however deserved, will end soon, not just for ourselves, but for the whole community of people who have together experienced the suffering of deportation. And then the resolution. Verse 8, "I will hear what God the Lord will say when he speaks shalom to his people and to his loyal ones." God announces the end of suffering, the end of invasion, the end of being refugees. This ending is what he means by peace. Peace is both a process and a result, but there is more, because the psalm ends with an image of the love affair. Steadfast love and trustworthiness meet, justice and peace kiss. The tryst between right dealing and peace, which we have also heard about in Isaiah, is the ultimate goal of God's dealing with Israel. And conversely, that love affair fulfills Israel's deepest longings in this life. Now, in a sense, this poem seems a bit airy or even impractical. Yet by choosing to evoke rather than describe, the poet reminds us that peace is hard to nail down. It can slip through our hands. We have to work at it, or as Jesus said, we have to be peacemakers, not just peace enjoyers. Yet at the same time, we cannot make peace through a simple operation. There is no Henry Ford assembly line process we can lay out. Peace comes out of the tension between the already and the not yet, and the awareness we must have that this world is not yet what it could be or should be. Now, in other psalms, this basic awareness of peace's desirability and elusiveness, of its importance to the individual and to the collective, plays out in different ways. Let's take the Psalms of Ascents, Psalms 120 through 134. Israelites making pilgrimage to Jerusalem sang these psalms as they entered the city, probably during the Second Temple or post-exilic period. Psalm 120 opens the series by praising God for hearing the psalmist cry for help, and then asks, "O Lord, rescue my life from the lying lips and embittering tongue." It then paints a contrast between faraway places, perhaps the lands to which the refugees from foreign invasion had fled, and the people of God who lived properly. The psalmist takes a side in the contest between the love of violence and its opposite. "I am peace, and so I speak. They are for war. Many translations render the line, I am for peace, but literally it says, I am shalom. That is, the speaker wants to identify his or her life intimately enough with peace so as to become it. It's not just that we are what we eat. We are what we long for. The search for peace has become part of the psalmist's core commitments. Now, slightly later, Psalm 122 reflects on the life of the pilgrim, remembering that I rejoiced when they said to me, let's go up to the Lord's house, to the temple. Why rejoice? What should someone praying this psalm expect to find in the temple? Not just a splendid building, which it was, or an enthusiastic party of worshipers, which there were. The psalm invites everyone within earshot to ask for the peace of Jerusalem. Verse 5. Ask whom? Well, God, of course. The pilgrims praying the psalm know Jerusalem's vulnerability on the world stage and hope for its peace because it needs to be a symbol of peace. And so the psalm goes on to wish that there should be shalom within the city's ramparts, verse 6. And in the third use of the term shalom in as many verses, the prayer says, for the sake of my siblings and neighbors, I will speak peace within you. The group of people praying and each individual within them gains an awareness of, sensitivity toward, and empathy for the rest of the people who hope in Israel's God. Peace is something to pray for, to celebrate, and to seek at all costs. Yet this peace, even when brought by God, involves the defeat of unjust individuals and social apparatuses. Psalm 125 has the pilgrims sing, those trusting in the Lord will be like Mount Zion, unshakable. God's actions justify their trust because God defeats unjust people, or as the psalm puts it graphically, the rod of the evil person will not rest on the neck of the righteous ones. Psalm 125, verse 3. The brutality of powerful people will fail in the end. God's care for those doing good will finally result in the condition of shalom upon Israel, while the crooked acts of the wicked backfire on them. In other words, peace has a moral dimension because God is a moral God. And the last occurrence of shalom in the Psalms of Ascents comes in Psalm 128, a blessing of the pilgrims possibly pronounced over them as they entered the city. They hope to see peace, shalom, for the city and all who come there so that their offspring and subsequent generations can live full lives, like, as verse 3 puts it, a fruitful vine or olive shoots surrounding your table. This text reminds us, by the way, of the prophet Micah's image of sitting under our own vine and fig tree unafraid, a beautiful vision of the enjoyable life. Now, these references to peace in texts of public worship surely call to mind the point that peace, shalom, concerns both the public and the private, the interior and the exterior, this generation and the next. It must go hand in hand with a moral commitment that focuses on the well-being of other human beings, not just ourselves. This sort of peace cannot exist without a broad empathy for others as well as other dispositions. These dispositions or state of mind or commitments, all those words seem applicable, involve reverence for God and realism about human evil, including our own inclinations toward evil. Without those kinds of interests, the word peace becomes a lie. The topic of peace also appears in another cluster of Psalms, Psalms 34 to 38. Psalm 34 is an acrostic in which each verse starts with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. This sort of psalm, and Psalm 37 is another one, tries to give a comprehensive view of the world, exhaustive, just like the alphabet exhausts all the meaningful sounds. Psalm 34 praises God all the time because of various acts of divine deliverance. It also calls upon those singing it to model their lives on God's actions among them. So, verse 14 invites sinners to turn from evil and do good, seek shalom and pursue it. Two things to notice. First, abandoning evil and embracing the good seems to be closely related or even equivalent to engaging in peacemaking. And second, we must seek peace as though it were hard to find, which it is, and pursue it as though it were running away, which it also often seems to do. In other words, shalom does not come about by accident. But what is shalom precisely? Verse 14 summarizes a brief discussion in the preceding verses that talk about people loving life and guarding their tongue from evil. So there's a close relationship between peace and the control of words, since the old saying, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me," does not tell the truth about our lives together. In any case, these Psalms continue the discussion, with Psalm 35:20 and 27 contrasting the way evil people live. They do not speak of peace. They thrive on the causes of conflict even when they pretend that others cause it, while the righteous experience God's desire to delight in their shalom. On the other hand, as Psalm 38:3 reminds us, even the righteous can experience the loss of shalom. Or rather, as this psalm of lament says, the righteous person is also the one who admits to having sins piled over my head. That's the paradox. Only the righteous admit to being unrighteous, and those who claim perfection risk being the worst of all. In the world of lament, a marvelous witness to which Psalm 38 is, the loss of peace goes with physical pain and social isolation, as well as with an awareness of sins. And now Psalm 37, the most complex of this group of psalms. Verse 11 says, "The poor will inherit the land or earth, and they will revel in lots of shalom." Interestingly, verse 29 says almost the same thing. "The righteous ones, the just ones, will inherit the earth, and they will inhabit it forever." This is, of course, the line Jesus alludes to. Poor and righteous seem equivalent, a combination that we also see in Jesus' Beatitudes, among other places in the Bible. Those who rely on God when they have no one else on whom to rely, and the far smaller group who rely on God even when they have others to rely on, will win in the end. The latter verse lies directly behind Jesus' idea that the meek or the restrained will inherit the earth. But the interesting thing is that peace in this psalm and elsewhere is not a condition in which everybody is a winner, at least in the short run. Rather, it's the condition in which things are put in order and the link between virtue and happiness is properly aligned. Or as verse 37 puts it, "Watch the innocent and see the upright, because the destiny of such a person is shalom." Peace comes from virtue. All well and good. But Psalm 37 also knows that the pursuit of peace comes at a price. It tells those praying it not to get all heated up. Don't envy or be agitated about evildoers or jealous of those doing wickedness. That is, religious people should recognize the reality of evil and our own proclivity toward it. Innocence must be earned, and the resentment of evil is one of the pathways to the embrace of evil. So vigilance is required. And so too is a positive set of actions, including generous giving to those in need, verse 21. Peacemaking requires the removal of wrong actions and attitudes and the cultivation of good ones. Yet there's one more dimension we should talk about. The book of Psalms talks about shalom by means of poetry. The great 20th century composer Arnold Schoenberg was once asked why there were no peace songs, only war songs and victory songs. He thought that what he called their bright, simple, direct message would be so empty-headed that they couldn't inspire anybody. And that's also why the Bible does not have any songs about peace, really. It has only songs about seeking peace and how hard that is. And it has models of the peace seeker. That's what we'll take up in the final video.